we go. Okay, sorry. Sound works. Awesome. Well, welcome to the History Center. This is Andrew, and he will be sharing his experience with water throughout his life with us. So I'm going to hand it over to him without further ado. Thank you.
Well, nice to meet you all. Hi to everybody on Zoom. I'm the author of this book, Shaped by Water, and I think the first thing is I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Rochester. I was born and raised here, born at St. Mary's Hospital. I joined the service after high school, and I taught survival, evasion, resistance, and escape in the military. And I came back to Rochester after that. I got my associate's degree at RCTC, and then I went up to the University of Minnesota, and I got a degree in political science and communication studies, and then my social studies licensure. And I went off to London, where I taught for a while there, and then came back and got a job at Mayo Clinic. And right now that's where I am in education at Mayo. So I stumbled into writing this book. I never thought I would be an author, but as we have all experienced, COVID was a devastating experience for many people, especially those of us in the healthcare field. And as I was working with more and more COVID, welcome. As I was working with more and more people and seeing, experiencing the stresses that all that brought on, I was getting a little depressed, and my wife and my mother paid attention to some of the news, and the Rochester Public Library put on a contest to write a book. And that book was, it had to have 3 themes: local history about water, personal experiences with water, and personal responsibilities towards water. And they encouraged me to enter the contest, which I thought there's no way I could place or have anything to do with it. But I thought this is a good opportunity for me to tell some of my stories for my son and my nephew. So I focused on writing the best stories of my life to share with my son and my nephew. And I thought I would have a nice Christmas present. Well, I won along with 3 other people. And so the book Shaped by Water was born. And what I'd like to do is read you a little bit out of it to get started, and then we can just have a nice conversation about maybe some of the things in the book, history, whatnot, things that are interesting to you. So I'll start with the introduction, and then I'll read the first chapter. It's a short series of short stories, and here we go. The night was dark and foggy when my mother's water broke. She and my dad climbed into a brand new, full-size 1976 brown Ford pickup truck and slowly, painstakingly drove from Plainview to St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, where I was born. I was raised in Rochester because my parents both eventually got jobs at Mayo Clinic. With the improvement in pay and benefits, we were able to travel to 49 states on family vacations. I went to Hawaii, my 50th state, on my honeymoon 34 years later. Returning to Rochester to raise my family, I know from experience what Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, has to offer. Water has made me who I am. On July 8th, 2012, my wife's water broke at Methodist Hospital, a medical center that is part of the same Mayo Clinic hospital system at St. Mary's, and my son Theodore was born. When the doctors lifted him up and turned to show me, he peed on everyone in the room. This seemed to be Theodore's way of announcing to the world that he was here and not going to be ignored. Like it has been for me, water is a powerful and formative influence in his life. I've lived my life adventuring in and around water. Exploring streams, rivers, and coastlines has connected me to water in profound ways. Water is everywhere, calling to us, showing us the way, and teaching us to flow around life's obstacles. Not even dams can hold water back indefinitely. It always finds its way around the obstacles in its path. Water shapes our world, and it shaped me through survival and combat swim training in the Air Force, and through my adventures with my son. I share my values with my son through shared experiences in and around water. Our stories are written in water, the very elixir of life. So the first chapter is called Bear Creek. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I began exploring a stream known as Bear Creek that flowed between 50th Avenue Southeast and Bear Creek Park in Rochester. I especially liked the area between 20th Street Southeast and Camp Kaler, the old Boy Scout camp. The creek, as we called it, was located a mile from my house. I would walk there alone or with my brother Alex on our way to meet friends. We visited so often that we wore a dirt path from our house across the farmer's alfalfa field to the creek. The water of the creek was clean, clear, and cool. Its bottom was clean sand, as deep as a little boy could dig. Sometimes we ran up and down the creek as fast as we could just to see how far ahead of our footsteps we could get. Then we'd turn around and watch them splash closed. At other times, we cannonballed into the deeper pools along the banks. We swam in the pools beside great tree trunks that had fallen into the water 100 years ago, or so we imagined. Minnows glimmered in the water, not by ones and twos, not by tens and twenties, but by the hundreds. I can remember watching great schools of minnows separate before me as living waves. I ran through these schools of minnows, imagining that I was Moses parting the Red Sea to free his people. I hardly ever went to the creek without a bucket and a net. I caught fish, crayfish, turtles, and some of the most interesting insect larvae I have ever seen. Once, we even caught buckets of lampreys, long eel-like fish with circular, boneless mouths. I can still recall how moist and refreshing the air smelled. The breeze often carried the scent of flowers in the spring and leaves in the autumn. The feel of the sand flowing with the water around my feet was joyful, playful, and interesting to me as a little boy. I remember standing in one spot while the water eroded the sand from in front of my feet, the gentle current piling it up behind me until I couldn't stand straight anymore and joyfully toppled into the water. I did it over and over again, just for fun. I wish those days could have lasted forever. My brother and I had 3 great delights: adventure, exploration, and discovery. When joy is everywhere, it brings a feeling of peace. The peace I found at the creek stemmed from a sense of belonging and the serenity found in clear water flowing over clean sand under great trees. The place itself filled me with a deep sense of belonging that seemed to emanate from the quiet sounds of nature and its beauty. Nature has a healing power, and for me, this sense of peace is where it came from. Maybe I had found one of the thin places where heaven and earth were close together. Maybe my guardian angel alighted here to watch me play in a safe but wild playground. The fun I had at the creek was not the fun of an amusement park. It was not the excitement of meeting your grandparents after a long time apart. It was the fun that is found when the place you know seems to know you in return, when the place that you revisit over and over is just the way it was when you left it last, yet somewhat different. It was the fun that happens every time you are surprised with some new critter or a fresh marvel brought about by the changing seasons. I explored this creek spring, summer, fall, and winter. Each season brought with it the pleasure and joy that God grants to those who look for it by getting to know a special place. It is the pleasure that is experienced by letting that place connect you to the grandest scale of the universe. I often lay in the warm sand on a tiny beach along the creek, looking up into a clear blue sky through the dappled sunlight filtering between maple leaves. Sometimes I watch the soft white clouds drifting high somewhere between earth and heaven. How many times did I imagine angels looking down at me or playing in the clouds? I dreamed of what it would be like to drift between the forest and heaven on the wings of butterflies. These were some of the happiest times of my childhood. As the creek froze in the winter, I broke off chunks of ice and pretended that they were icebergs. Sometimes, when the ice hadn't completely imprisoned the creek's water, I would free an especially large slab, grab a branch, and ride my iceberg like a raft down the creek. I imagined I was an old-time river rafter heading for the camp of Lewis and Clark or an Arctic explorer on the lookout for polar bears. While visiting the creek, I could feel a connection to the times before Olmsted County was settled. Sadly, as the years went by, the creek didn't stay the same. At some point in the 90s, I noticed that the diversity of minnows in its waters had decreased. The size of the chubs and suckers had gotten smaller. I no longer found soft-shell turtles, and occasionally only found a snapper. Even the creek chubs were absent. Gone were the interesting insect larvae at which I used to marvel. Silt dirtied the once clean sands, and I didn't feel safe walking barefoot in the creek anymore. I began to find garbage, first plastic bags, then cans and glass. Broken bottles and metal littered the banks. Beavers used to live in the creek, but someone had trapped them out. I know because I found the traps. The beaver dam had been ripped apart to release the water, and another beautiful thing was gone. When the Boy Scouts started talking about selling Camp Kaler, I asked them to make it a park. I petitioned them to sell it with a conservation easement to protect the great trees and the creek. Sadly, the Scouts did not see the same value in the camp or the creek that I saw. I was a child, thinking the thoughts of a child. I had the unbounded, unconstrained hopes of a child. I tried without success to save the place I had come to love, but I was alone in my efforts. Who else had I seen at the camp after it closed? Who else did I find wandering the trails at sunrise or sunset, or even in the dark on nights when the moon was full? During the many times I visited the park alone, I had never seen a fellow wanderer. God calls us to be stewards of creation, and Boy Scouts are supposed to be stewards of the land. I failed to protect the creek. As a Boy Scout, I couldn't protect this piece of paradise that needed protection. This didn't mean that I failed to live up to my own ideals. To fail is human, and God knew my heart. He knew that even though I was a child of 17, I did my best. I kept true to my faith, and that is what mattered. Because I had never encountered another person exploring the creek whom I hadn't invited myself, I felt that the birds, the creek, and the very place itself knew me and no other. Throughout my childhood, the creek became a friend to me that can only be described in transcendental or mystical language. This was the place I visited alone when things at home or school bothered me. I felt safe, welcome, and at peace in the embrace of this treasured spot. Why did this beautiful creek bring me such comfort? When I sat alone in the outdoor amphitheater or in the clearing among the pine trees that served as a chapel at Camp Kaler, I felt centered. In this place, listening to God preach sermons through the wind in the trees, I felt better than I did anywhere else. The creek that ran through Camp Kaler was the place that connected me to my center. It connected me to God and the greatness of the natural world. I could go there sad, mad, frustrated, or confused, and leave at peace, no therapist needed. I knew every rapid, every turn, and every tree along the banks of that part of Bear Creek. My mind still walks those paths in my memories today. Step by step, I retrace my childhood along the golden sands of Bear Creek through the sandy trails of Camp Kaler. Like all children, I grew up and left home. I joined the United States Air Force in 1994 and said a temporary goodbye to Minnesota. The creek receded into my memories, though I would visit it and revisit it many times in the years to come. When I returned home in 2008, in need of healing from the slings and arrows of life's misfortunes, I went back to the creek to sit on its banks and think. I found a place that I knew well and listened to a mourning dove, a chickadee, and some blue jays singing their songs. They didn't recognize the stranger in the midst. The place that had once known me so well didn't seem to know me anymore. The traffic sounds were louder now that more people lived in the area. I missed the natural quiet broken only by the murmur of the creek. Bear Creek is still there. It still needs protection and time to heal. The cost of modern development is high. During my last visit, I found a bike in the water under the bridge and garbage drifting where minnows once swam. Magazines, cans, bottles, and plastic were growing algae and marring nature's beauty on the beach. Gone was the purity of the stream, and gone was the purity of my youth. I mourn the loss of both. In 2018, I contacted the DNR about the water quality of the creek, and this is what they said, and I quote, "The last time we looked at the data on this creek, around 2013, we found too much bacteria to support splashing around, so it's impaired for recreation. This doesn't mean you can't go into the creek, but you want to be careful, especially a day or two after a rainstorm. It's not always suitable for swimming and wading due to the high bacteria levels caused by the presence of human and animal waste in the water." This news upset me. Our children need clean creeks and water for play and adventuring. My child needs a creek, a forest, a wild place to experience the three great delights: adventure, exploration, and discovery. He needs to be able to connect to the natural world and explore without fear of unseen contaminants washing over him. Can we give this tainted legacy to our children, to the next generation? The choice isn't one we can make as individuals. We must make it as a society, Democrats, Republicans, and independents together. The choice will be made whether we choose consciously or not. Choosing not to choose is a decision in itself. I hope that we will all choose a brighter, cleaner, and more beautiful world. A world where clean water flows and minnows swim freely. A world where a boy like me or a grandchild like yours can play, walk, and grow under the embrace of great trees in the dappled sunlight of their magnificent canopies. This is why I am passionate about water quality. To care for the rippling creek, the gently flowing stream, and the calming river is to care for my friend. My hope is that these waters will always be protected as we prepare our world for the generations to come. The magic is there to heal our wild spaces. We can choose to set it free. So that's the introduction of the book. There are many chapters in here. All are stories about things that I've experienced personally and deeply and have been moved by. The table of contents has quite a number. I go down to Lake Thunderhead in Missouri, where I think I was nearly abducted. And so there's an interesting story about that. Go to the Boundary Waters, where I lose a paddle and get, we don't get lost, but we're, my friends and I, with no adult supervision, are afraid that our would-be rescuers, we've been blown into the Quetico, are coming to hunt us down and, take us because we didn't have passports. And so we hide from them and eventually make it back. And it goes on to my experiences in the military. And then when I come back home and have a child and the things that I teach him, the many, many experiences that my son and I have with water, most of them centering around here. But what I'd really like to do is to find out what you guys are interested in and what you would like to hear more about or talk about with that bit of an introduction. What brought you here, and what do you want to hear about or talk about? Yeah, we'll just start here. Just introduce yourself as a small enough group, and we'll just move from left to right.
I also grew up on that creek.
Bear Creek, very nice.
Yeah,
Whereabouts?
mostly right around Slatterly Park.
Okay,
You
Yep.
know, But
seen a
did
lot of
my-
changes, more changes than I've seen.
so did my aunts and uncles, and
That's wonderful.
yeah,
So what brought you here tonight?
just to see what you had to say.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering, when did you start to realize the importance of water, bodies of water to you?
I don't think I knew the importance of water in my life until I started writing this book. Now, it was always there. I have spent all my free time around water. And I didn't realize that until I started thinking about these themes. Everybody around me knew it. And when the Rochester Public Library put out the contest, people came to me and said, you should write this book. And then I realized myself how important it was. And when I've had some really, major things go on in my life, I've ended up by water to sort things out. When I was in the service, one of the things that happened to me is I was with a bunch of guys, and they decided to take a road trip, and they brought this young lady along, and I didn't like what was going on. And eventually I found out she was running away from home, and they were helping her, and I didn't know this, and I was livid when I found out. And so trying to figure out what to do, because I'm stuck here with all these guys. There's this girl, she's underage, and I don't want any part of this. What do you do? There's no cell phones back then. You had to you couldn't call anybody unless you had a quarter. And I ended up, this was in Washington State, and I was I was by the coast. And so I walked out to the ocean, and I walked along the coast all night. I went, and then the story is in the book, and I just sorted through my emotions and my feelings and thinking what to do. I ended up spending what night I did spend out there in a giant redwood log that had been washed up, and I just crawled. It started to rain, so I crawled into this hollow log that was huge, with two basset hounds that had followed me. And we went to sleep in this log while it rained, and I got up and went back, and then I called her parents and got her home. But yeah, that was, I needed that. I needed to listen to the waves and feel, the mist, and think through all of these things, and having these experiences, and there's many of them, I find myself both in that place and connecting to that place as long as I'm open to it. And my mind wanders, and a lot of it is the sound, the lapping of the waves, or the rolling of the breakers, that really I think draws me, as well as the idea that, as I think about it, every bit of water that's going by will probably never go by that place again. And so it's refreshing, in a sense, refreshing itself. Is it saying, you never step in the same stream twice? It's real. And I don't have, so there's two kind of things to this. I have a big fear of water in one sense, but I also have this respect, and I get a lot of peace from it. I've been in many life and death situations with water, more than I should have. I almost died several times scuba diving, where I got caught in rip currents, or, ran out of air too deep. I did stupid things, right? And live to tell about it. But those stories aren't in here. But so I have this fear of the ocean, and fear of, swift, deep water. Yet I have no problems wading into a river or a stream and swimming across, or a lake. I'm just, there's the fear, but you can conquer your fear. One time, so here's an example. I was out in the middle of the Indian Ocean on an island that was just maybe a little bit bigger than this building. And I have a habit of getting up when the sun comes up. And I'm walking around the island, and I saw a pod of dolphins. Now, this island, there's no other islands in the vicinity. The islands are separated by many miles. And I jumped in the water, and I swam out to meet the dolphins, because I wanted to connect. I wanted to connect. It's probably a pod of 100 or so. It was huge. And I swam a good mile out into the ocean. And the dolphins, they didn't want to have anything to do with me, so they swam away. So here I am in this, you know, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a tiny little island. I'm a mile away from it. And when I turned around, I couldn't see it. So, and I knew all about the sharks and the things that were under me because I read guidebooks for fun. You know, I read about all the different species of animals that were here. And I centered myself here in this ocean that was so deep, you know, and it's so powerful. And I came up, you know, on a big wave, and I got a peek of the island, and I just started swimming back, and I dead reckoned it right to the spot, and I got there. So there's a deep fear, but a deep centering and a deep respect, and I think some foolishness that, you know, that goes along with it. But you know, in those days, I was young and strong, and I had no. I knew I had my physical limits were really, you know, out there. I could out. I was never the best at anything, but I was number two at everything. So I thought I was in a good place to, you know, take those challenges. But I didn't realize it until I wrote this book, and I realized I spend all, you know, all the fun activities with my son. They're centered around water. We go fishing, kayaking, canoeing, swimming. You know, I taught him how to swim. I taught him how to do all these things, you know, and we connect through water. You know, the last couple of days of trout season, I'm an avid trout fisherman, and he's finally at the age that we could hop in the river and walk, you know, for 2 hours upstream and fished. And we have this system down where, you know, we sneak up on the fish in the river, you know, and we take these, you know, steps, and I usually let him fish first, and then I go, and then he goes, and then I go, and we work our way upstream. But and then we have the system that, okay, so if I caught the fish, then he get, you know, the first fish or whatever, then he gets to stay in front until he catches a fish, and then we switch, and and it's, you know, and then we have some of these other rules we set, like if you get snagged, you have to let the other person fish up to the snag, because usually you get snagged where the fish are, right? So that's kind of fun. Catch a lot of tree fish, but yeah, so it didn't dawn on me until that point. I always knew water was important because, you know, when you teach survival, water, you can only live 3 days without water. So what is it? It's like 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and 3 months in isolation.
Mhm.
Something like that. So
Well, I would say that two things come to mind when we talk about water. One is growing up in St. Paul, my dad would take us kids down to the Mississippi River to look for fossils and go hiking along, and then for a while we lived in Duluth, so Lake Superior, but I found very healing because we moved around so many times, and we landed in Duluth, and just listening to the waves going against all the smooth stones and stuff. It really is, to me, a very healing place to go. So I have fond memories of water.
I love jumping in Lake Superior. That cold water is so refreshing.
Yeah, won't it?
Oh my goodness, it's so refreshing. Yeah. Did you ever see a place called Cutthroat Creek?
No, I haven't. Is that up there?
So it is. It's I think it's north of Duluth. It's on the North Shore, up north of Duluth. But so a couple of summers ago, we went on a road trip and went camping along the North Shore, and you know, you hear a lot of stories, okay, you know, global warming, the temperatures are warming, what are the impacts? And I had planned on fishing while I was, you know, going up. And so one of the places I had planned on fishing was Cutthroat Creek. And we got there, and the creek was completely dry. There were a few small pools with fish in them, but we walked for a couple of miles up the dry creek bed. I mean, literally nothing. And of course, me being me, we ended up catching lots of these fish in a bucket and bringing them out to the lake and letting them go because we were, you know, felt really bad. that there was going to be, that these fish were going to die. There's dozens of fish in, little pools like this, and dry, and you could see all of the work that Trout Unlimited had done on the stream banks and things, to make all habitat for the trout, and it was all exposed and dry, and it was really sad, to see that, and it made me really want to do something. And what I wish I had done that I didn't do was call a newspaper or somebody to come and look at it. But I did. I called my representative and said, this, and I sent pictures. I don't know what happened after that. But how about you, kiddo? What do you like about water? Yeah. Do you swim in lakes? You have a pool? Awesome. Can you do the front crawl? No? Can you do the side stroke? That's good. Can you do the survival float? You hold your breath and you just kind of sit like this, and then you take a breath and you hold your breath again. And you kind of float in the water, just float to survive. Do you know how to make a life jacket out of your pants? Oh, you should learn that. That is fun. You can survive for a very long time with just a pair of pants in the water. You take them, you tie a knot in each foot, and you take the pants, you get them behind you, and you hold them open, and you swoosh it into the water like that, and then you close it if you have a belt. I always wear a belt. If you have a belt, you can make it tight, and then you can lay on top of it, and one leg goes here and one leg goes there, and you are able to float for days like that. It's a good skill to have. How about you?
So I guess I'll like to share kind of 2 points first. So actually, when we first moved to Minnesota, we lived in a little house by the Bear Creek. So he lived there when he was born and until the age of 2.
Oh wow!
So
Nice.
So we've done a lot of hikes. So they growing forever. And then like what resonated with me is when you said that you remember every single tree, and every single rock. I grew up in the from the Czech Republic. So we spent summers at my grandparents' cabin, and they had like it was actually more of a river than a creek, but I also line up with grab a canoe through that river with my eyes closed.
Right. Yes.
It just
Yes.
never goes away.
Yeah. Those memories are so poignant.
Yeah, it's crazy. And anyway, so like the reason why we got here actually is I was really interested in your experience with like survival skills, So I would love to hear, how you kind of got into it,
Oh, sure.
like joining the Air Force and getting into training that.
Yeah, you bet. So let me share the story. When I was going through high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought a lot about, many different things, and nothing really appealed to me, but I love being outside. And my buddies were telling me they were going to join the Air Force. So I went to the recruiters with them, and they had pizza. I mean, who doesn't want pizza, right? So they were giving me pizza, which is every high schooler's favorite food, and I would just yum, and then we would play softball and whatever. They would talk about all the opportunities, and my buddies were just all gung-ho. And finally they talked me into taking the ASVAB. So there's a test that you take, an aptitude test, and I did really well on it. I was quite surprised. I thought, well, maybe, okay. And so I started talking to them about career options and things, and they talked to me about SEER school. And I said, well, I'd like to do a SEER school. I want to teach. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to sign up for something else. And they lied to me. They told me I had to be, something else. And so they steered me towards combat control pararescue. So I actually signed up for that. And there's a story in the book about this where I have to come to, I come to an inflection point in my life, a point where I have to make a decision. And I was really good at the combat control. So I signed up for combat control. Hundreds of people did. By the time I found out that I could have signed up to be a SEER instructor, There was only probably 16 or 20 of us left, and everybody else had failed out, and they tried to fail you out. I mean, it's special forces. It's really challenging. It's like having an Olympic workout 6 days a week, you know. And one day I ran into this guy who said, "Yeah, I'm going to SEER school." I was like, "What?" "I'm going to be an instructor." "What?" "That's what I want to do." So I went and asked if I could do it. And they said, "No, you can't, because you've signed up for a more critically manned career field." And I said, "Well, this is what I want to do." Right. And they said, "Well, you have to self-eliminate from the program, and then you have to reapply and try to get in." And I prayed about it a lot, and I came to the decision. So I learned a lot about what was going on in the special forces as I went through the training, and the fighting that goes on that nobody knows about. I talked to some of the most decorated war veterans in the military. They were our instructors, and the more I learned, the more stories I heard, the harder I thought it would be for me. I found myself questioning my ability to pull the trigger on somebody, but I had I was a no qualms about saving lives. I mean, I was a patriot. I love my country. I was very, very pro-military. I loved the service, and the camaraderie and the people and the passion that they had for serving. And I knew I wanted to be there. But I made the choice to do what they call an SIE, self-initiated elimination, which, an 18-year-old kid making that decision, it was really hard. And they didn't make it easy. I mean, I was punished, big time, because I was number 2. I was like the number 2 guy at that point in training, and they really had high hopes for me. And I told them I didn't want to do it, and they were really mad. And I ended up going through the process. I had to do a bunch of extra testing, and I was accepted into the survival program. And that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I served with a passion. I loved teaching. I loved the skills that I learned. I was good at it. And the job I had was saving lives. So if you lost your primary weapon, anybody who was caught behind enemy lines would have my training, and then their job was to effect their own rescue, and they would have the skills to do it. So we took it, super seriously. And I wish I would have saved the letters and things that people wrote to me about their experiences and how much they appreciated, the teaching that I provided. And obviously it was a whole structure, within the military. There was a lot of instructors, and we were all doing this good job, and it was a blast. I mean, it was something, if you want to have an adventure, and I tell anybody that I talk to, if you really want to set your life up for success, look at joining the service, and I really, I'm dedicated to the Air Force. I think that's the best one, but it's not for everyone. There are things. My best bud, who told me he was going to join the Air Force, ended up joining the Army, and I ran into him when I was in the Air Force. We both went to Fort Benning, which is an Army base he went there for Army stuff, and I went there to go to jump school. And I ran into him, jumping out of airplanes. I'm like, "What are you doing, James? You told me you were joining the Air Force." "I want to be a Ranger." So that's what he ended up wanting to do. And then my other buddy, he joined the Air Force, and then did a bunch of drugs and ended up in Leavenworth. So I mean, you never know how things are going to turn out, but don't do drugs, because it sucks. The consequences will change your life. But yeah, so we taught survival for every environment. It was any environment you can think of, including urban environment, survival. And we learned to start fires on water. You can really you can really do a lot. People are way more capable than they believe. You can do more than you imagine when you decide that you're going to do it. And the biggest thing that people lose track of, I think, in survival situations is the will to survive. Humans are incredibly resilient and able to withstand things that your brain can outperform your body, right? Your brain can make your body go beyond its limits. And I have a story in the book about this where I am, this is when I was doing combat control training and I'm swimming and I'm going, we did what they called underwaters. So you jump in the pool, right? And you swim underwater. It's a, Olympic sized pool. So you go down and you come back. And sometimes you go down, you come back, and you go down and you come back. Well, that's really hard to do. And we would do it over and over and over again until somebody passed out and then they were eliminated from the program, right? But they would push us until somebody failed. I mean, that was the goal, right? You only want the best of the best, the strongest of the strongest, the absolute toughest of the tough. And so we would push ourselves to these extreme limits. And I wasn't going to be that guy. And I'm sure, I was probably getting ready to pass out, but the darkness, was closing in. I just had this tunnel vision. And the guys, my team, we came up with all these systems to, help each other, right? And the cadre were always making it tough. But we had this, all the guys that were in my lane, grabbed a hold of each other's arms. And if you push out, right, the guy at the end is moving really, really fast, right? Because nobody's moving here, because there's a wall. And so they did that, and it's accordion kind of thing. And the end guy grabbed me and pulled me back, and then they all pull their arms in, right? And you come back really fast. But I pushed myself right to, and they knew, they could see it somehow, that I was at the point of failure, and they rescued me, and that's the teamwork that you want in the military. You want people who are willing to put it all on the line, for you. Because honestly, when people go to war, they're not fighting for their country. They're not fighting for, the big political ideas. They're fighting for the guy right next to them. That's who they're fighting for. We can come back to more survival stuff. How about you?
When I was scheduling this, I realized that most of the cities I've spent, or towns rather, I have spent my life in have all been, they aren't there because of a large body of water. And then I went to school in Chicago, and my campus was right on the lake. Wow, this is something else. So I was just kind of fascinated with someone else's perspective on water and hearing that, and especially with the local connections to Rochester, because there's substantially more water in Rochester than there is where I grew up.
Yeah, and there's more water now than there was before, because they built all these reservoirs and things, after the flooding of was it in the 80s? I can't remember when the big flood happened. Late 70s. 79, was it 79? Yeah. Yep, big flood. I remember it, but just barely. I just remember our house was dry, and the houses on either side of us, the water was all the way up. The basements were all flooded, and I saw, my parents, took me down the street to talk to neighbors and whatever, and we saw all their furniture floating. And yeah, it was just, but our house was just right. And we were, it's one of the things that you learn teaching survival and studying survival, is that there is a bit of luck involved, that people can do everything right and die, and people can do everything wrong and live. And there is no answer for that. There's no explanation. And that happened to our house. We were the only dry house on the block. It was Fifth Avenue, Southeast, and the Zumbro River is right there at the end of the block. So, yeah, but yeah, water is wonderful, and I found my experiences. Did you ever get out on the lake? Oh my goodness.
It's embarrassing. It's properly embarrassing.
Oh man.
You know.
Yes, you have to do that. You have to do that. So you're here in Rochester. Have you gotten in any of the water in Rochester?
Right.
Oh, go to Foster Aaron's, get in the water, and just experience it. I was here when Foster Aaron's was not a park, and at some point I had learned about it, and I decided that I wanted to fish there. I think I was 12, and so I lived southeast Rochester. It wasn't Rochester yet. It was actually right outside Rochester, but it's now well within Rochester. And the story that I just read to you, those fields and things that I walked through, those all in the last 3 years were developed. So they're not there anymore. But I rode my bike from basically Marion all the way to Foster Aaron's, and I walked. So where the dock is, the fishing dock, if you guys have been there, that was a sandbar that kind of went out, and I walked out into the water until I was, I don't know, probably a little less than chest deep, and I had a mask and a snorkel and my fishing pole. And I started fishing, and I would fish, and when I would get a fish on the line, I'd put my face in the water and watch. I'd bring the fish in so I could breathe through the snorkel and watch the fish, and it was so cool. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But it's a great place to get your feet wet. And you can paddle, I think, on Silver Lake, can't you? You can get a paddle boat and go out. You should do that. You should experience the water around you, and it will change you. How about you?
Well, I heard about this through the newsletter, and I saw that you were a veteran. Had written a little bit about, well, there was a little blurb for some information for you, and then of course your book is on Google Books, so I looked into that a little bit. I don't know, you are a veritable wealth of knowledge, and you're very profound, it seems. You have a lot of stories. And you touched upon a couple powerful sentiments that really connect with me, namely the change that we've seen in our community, in the last 10 years even. I would say it's probably more like the last 30, and then you touch on how little attention is paid to the important chains of, our ecosystems, the chains that kind of bind everything together, that are slowly cracking because they're fragile, and when they snap, the ecosystem collapse. And I think so little attention is paid to the idea of having clean water, or having like regularly irrigated streams or brooks. And I love Bear Creek, the Dakota would travel up and down that in the 1830s and 1840s, and we came in and pushed them out. So but there's arrowheads there, and you've just got a lot of information about what we're doing to our community, and it's that one where I grew up. So I like that. I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to hear another story?
Absolutely.
I don't know how much time we have. Do we have time for another story?
It is 7:23, so a shorter one. Or if you two have questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even include you. I do want to include
Okay.
you. Oh, okay, but you guys talk. What?
It's also really interesting because I was just in Bear Creek like a week ago running in it, and it was very, very dirty. It was like mud and it was disgusting.
There was no mud when I was a kid.
Yeah.
None.
And
It was
really
all
interesting
pure sand.
hearing how it was so different, so beautiful, and there's actual life in it.
Yeah.
Because when I went there, it was nothing. It just
It was full. I mean, so there was these there's two different kinds of creek chubs, and I can't tell that one of them is long and thin and has tiny little scales, and another one is big and broad, and it's got bigger scales that are more mirror-like. And then there's a horny head chub, which is a big fish with all these horns on its head, and stone rollers that build these piles of stones in the water. It was full of darters. There was the Johnny Darter and a few others that I can't forget. And then there were the the brook lampreys, and there were shiner minnows. It was just loaded with fish, and I would find painted turtles, soft shell turtles, and snapping turtles in there. And by the end, I only found snappers. And I collected a lot of this stuff, and I would keep it for the summer, and I'd come and let it go in the winter. Or not in the winter, but at the end of the summer. And I would have, tons there were loads of salamanders. I don't see salamanders hardly at all anymore. And they were everywhere, like all over the place. And yeah, and I ran the very same place you did. We ran up and down that creek, and it was pure sand. We would run all the way up to Pinewood Elementary School. Yeah. Well, it can be that way again. We just have to choose. How about you?
I feel like a big thing that you're sort of talking about a little bit that I'm sort of interested in is against, I guess, is the whole decrease with biodiversity around these sort of areas, salamanders and all that kind of stuff before. Now it's just certain species, and that's not very good. There's nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah. So your question is, I suppose I'm just gonna play that forward. Can it be reversed? And I would say that there's two things happening. Right now, the Supreme Court just ruled that the EPA can't regulate much of the water in the country. So there's going to be a serious decline in water resources nationally. However, Minnesota is going in the opposite direction, especially with the legislation that that Dayton got through. He focused on water across the board. And if we keep that focus up, if we keep doing things in the right way, we can be a shining beacon to the rest of the country. And the best way you can do that for streams is to have these buffer zones, streams and lakes, just 100-foot buffer or 300-foot buffer that doesn't get plowed or tilled, and that includes drainage ditches and things of that nature. And another thing that we can do that I wish there was a big focus on right now, especially with where we are with the climate, is on planting trees that will shade these water sources. And there's some other ideas, but the shade, if we can shade our streams and lakes and rivers and keep them cooler, they will have more oxygen and support more life, and they'll also clean the water that's coming through. A tree is a great filter, and to get even more technical, if you combine that with symbiotic fungi that can break down the chemicals that are in the soil and that are washing through, you can really do a great job of rejuvenating these water features. But if we would go a step further and take, like, Silver Lake, why don't we put a bunch of solar panels out in the middle of that lake? Take 10% of the lake. See, that's my other idea. Put 10% of the lake, and you put solar panels on it in the middle, right? And nobody goes there, right? You kind of block that off so people can't. And then the lake is going to cool down. You're creating habitat. You're going to increase the biodiversity, but you also increase the size of the fish and the health of the ecosystem. So it should be a win-win, right? Because if you protect that area, first you're generating energy, you're cooling the lake, so it's not going to evaporate so much. And why isn't that dam generating electricity? Come on. We have micro hydro that is so efficient and effective now. We could install a power generator on there and power, I don't know, 5 or 10 city blocks with it. And then the energy is produced locally. We're going to have a high paying job. Somebody's got to take care of that, and manage it. And we're utilizing our resource, and we get to keep our lake. So we can have solar power, we can have micro hydro, we can increase the biodiversity and fight climate change all at once. And we should make it, and it's a win-win-win-win situation.
Everybody done that with the panels,
Nobody has done it.
No.
Nobody has done it. No.
I think there'd probably be, and this is what gets my blood boiling very quickly. There's going to be pushback from people within the community because it's an eyesore we have to pay for it out of our pocket, and nobody's gonna wanna front.
We
the-
don't,
the
we
money.
don't. Here's why we don't. Because there are companies right now that are leasing land to put solar panels on, and those companies could pay Rochester. They could pay Rochester, pay for itself. It could be an economic generator for the city. We could also dredge the lake and sell the soil that we dredge out of the lake, because it will have accumulated a great deal of nitrogen and it becomes a fertilizer for farm fields. There is huge science behind it. Democrats and Republicans agree on this, and I can find the literature where they took them out and had this talk. There was a talk about doing retention ponds so if a river or a lake flooded, not a lake, but if a river flooded, there would be a level that it hit and it would pour into a ditch or something that would hold the water and let the dirt settle out, and then it would come back into the stream or river, and then you would basically mine or scrape the edges of that and then sell it to farmers for fertilizer, because we're over fertilizing. The nitrogen and phosphorus levels are really high in runoff, and you can sell it back. It's economically viable, and that's been proven. And Minnesota Republicans and Democrats agreed on that when they were taken on a tour of the state and other places where these things were being tested. So it can be an economic generator. We could do it right here, and we don't have to pay for it. We can get paid for doing it. So again, it's a win, win, win. Yes, there's always pushback. But if we talk about the beauty and joy and the well-being that comes from doing these things and the value, and our voices are overwhelmingly positive, and we don't be disrespectful, but we stay in our center of truth, then those arguments can be won, because you can't you can argue, I'll put it this way, you can argue with physics all you want to, but a ball will always roll downhill if there's no friction. I mean, so stand in your truth, make your statement, and let the chips fall where they may.
So that being said, I think a good final question is, are you hopeful for the future?
That is a really good question. You talked a lot about things kind of coming downhill a little bit. Do you think your children, or perhaps your grandchildren, will see a Bear Creek that's got that soft white salt sand?
So here's where I'm at. I think that we are in climate breakdown, and the world will not be the same, but there will be beauty. There will be beautiful places. And if we choose, it comes down to a choice. If we choose, we can have a better world to give to them. The world's broken, no question about it. But on my property, I planted apples, I planted pears, and we even have peaches that'll grow here. I planted butternuts. I planted an orchard that will provide, and I have chickens, and I have 250-year-old trees that I am caring for. And I know what's coming because I believe in the science. And I also know that there are ways that I can make what I have the very best. And this is me speaking for me, but that's what God asks of me, is to be my very best, do my very best. Like I talked about with what happened with Bear Creek, I tried to get the Scouts, people, an organization that believes in stewardship, to protect Camp Kaler, and they sold it. I failed, but that doesn't mean that I didn't do the right thing, and it doesn't mean that what I did didn't have impact, because I'm in a position now where I am doing things on my own property, and I'm teaching. I'm here talking to you. I'm teaching and talking about the things that can be done right. And I do believe there are many people doing everything in their power to bring about a better world, but we're on the knife's edge. And I think that we will always be on the knife's edge. So I have hope for the future. It will not be the past, though. It won't be what I grew up with. It will be different. And I will find joy in the things that I see every day because there will always be beauty.
Very, very, very well spent.
Thank you. I am selling books, $20 a piece if you want to buy one.
I have a question for you.
Yes,
Have you ever heard of the group called Clean Water Action?
yes.